if you believe GameFi is going to make it, holding a bag of these is a really good hedge, because that's a bet on the sector, right? That's the equivalent of buying an index of the sector, because between these infrastructure and ecosystem tokens, they've basically covered a finger in all the pies. If you're willing to do more direct research, then you can start to look at...
Are you bullish on GameFi? If so, you need to watch this interview with Dylan. Dylan is a collector, an investor, and also the founder of FatCats Group, which is a Web3 investment collective. If you check out their site, they have done a ton of research on a lot of very popular NFT projects. And also, Dylan is very bullish on GameFi. You can check out his GameFi report here. So very much excited about having Dylan on this podcast and sharing his insights about GameFi. He'll tell us what segments should we pay attention to in GameFi, how he structures his portfolio, and should we be looking at established gaming projects, or should we be looking at new ones that are in price discovery? All of this and much more in the first part of my interview with Dylan. Before we jump in, if you appreciate the talented guests that I bring onto this channel, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. It'll support my guests and my work. Thanks so much, and enjoy my interview with Dylan. It's so great to have you back on the show. I feel like you're a regular now. You are one of the regulars, and a big reason for that is because just the immense knowledge that you have around NFTs, around GameFi. Why don't you give the listeners a quick introduction about yourself, just so they can get just as excited as I am about having you on?
Well, I get to say that I'm one of the founding members of the network, so that's a cool kind of feather in my hat. But a little bit about me. So before coming into Web3 in 2021, I would say I've been quite a Bitcoin maxi, quite a libertarian, so I'd always been following crypto. But I was caught up in the same loop as many others of where's the utility? I hadn't quite got my head around the fact that Bitcoin is more money than it is currency. And I don't think I need to kind of go into that too much. But I was stuck in that loop as well. But in 2021, after having a career in private banking and then in fine art consulting, when I started seeing the Beeple's pieces sell, I knew something was really cooking over here. And then speaking to Sotheby's and Christie's, hearing that they were already involved in Decentraland, I was like, this is where I kind of need to be. So GameFi was the first thing that excited me, and I'm still really excited about it, even though I would say that it's been a lot longer than we thought for the GameFi kind of attention to be there that it's finally getting now.
Got it. And so what have you learned from the previous cycles? Like, what kind of information are you taking into this cycle that you think would be useful for everyone to know?
So a lot of what goes on in Web3 is about a promissory note, right? It's about a narrative. It's about what could be, what might be. And when it comes to things like a virtual world or metaverse or a game, you kind of have to produce, right? Numbers don't lie. The substance has to be there. And unfortunately, in the previous cycle, and I've been consistent in not blaming Axie for this. Axie is a really good example of a game that had a very simple mechanic that intended to do more, but couldn't build fast enough. And then it kind of got into a loop that wasn't sustainable and spiraled out of control. And at the same time that that's happening, of course, Meta was making its mess. So people were like, the metaverse is over. And so very much that euphoria that was there in the last cycle, I think this time around, we've all replaced it with, have you actually solved the pain points? Do you know how to onboard users? Do you have a game that people enjoy? It doesn't have to be a AAA game. It can be Candy Crush, but it better be enjoyable. And have you found a way to hide the wires? Because no one coming from traditional gaming wants to open a wallet, wants to bridge coins, wants to have payment problems. So these are kind of the core things that we're looking at now, that in the early euphoria stage, everyone like last year was willing to buy, 2 years ago was willing to buy the NFTs and, just put ungodly amounts of money towards things that really couldn't answer these questions.
So when you think about the gaming space, there's two primary areas that I can think of, which is the infrastructure. Think of these layer 2 solutions that are focused on gaming, like Immutable X or Gala Games. Now they have their own chain, or the consumer application level, where you're focused on the actual game. And from my experience, a lot of people tend to be a little bit more conservative during the bear market or I should say the cooler parts of the market, and they're more focused on the infrastructure because they feel like they can not necessarily put all of their eggs in one basket versus investing in a specific application. What are your thoughts about that strategy? And do you feel like we're at a place in the market right now where people can be a little bit more aggressive? Or I guess in this particular case, perhaps maybe you are being more aggressive, right? Because we're not going to give financial advice here, but just wanted to get your thoughts on the two areas and how you see them.
Okay, so let me say this before I forget it. I think that we can break these things into 5. You've got complete kind of layers, as you say, infrastructure. Let's look at something like IMX, Immutable, as you mentioned, and Matic. Okay, these are full-on infrastructure levels trying to make places for games to be possible. Then you've got the gaming ecosystems. These are the groups like Gala and Ronin, and now Portal, that are trying to help as many games solve the problems that they themselves are trying to solve, right? They're basically the Steams of Web3. And so, well, we'll break down what's invest. Okay, then you've got the direct games themselves, right, which you can often also directly invest into with their assets or their tokens. And then you have 2 other offshoots, because these keep coming up. You've got things like Superverse and Blockgames, which are trying to offer a service of onboarding, right? They're trying to help bring in the Twitch streamers and trying to onboard the players and give them reward programs and missions and stuff like that. So they are doing deals with the individual games or the gaming ecosystems. And then the last layer is you have the hybrid guild VCs. A shout out, for example, would be to Beam, previously Merit Circle, and YGG. And these are the groups that are both directly investing in seed rounds. So their token really has a potential upside if they've picked well. These were survivors from the last cycle, so they have a lot of good connections. But also, they're also player ecosystems. They're in high demand because a lot of them have managed to keep the Axie guilds and stuff going. And so if they are a supporter of your project in a VC, they might also bring 50,000 players that have remained through the bear. Because a lot of people lost track that even though Axie might have had 2.2 million at its height, I believe, all through the bear, there were still 240,000 people logging in. And these big guilds often are a huge chunk of that. So these are the 5 areas. And I would say if you want to talk from a conservative point of view, your most conservative route would be to go the gaming ecosystems, right? Because then you're able to say, Gamefi is going to make it, but I have no idea which game is going to make it. And this platform is going to benefit as long as they've got one that wins, right? Look at Steam. Maybe 2 or 3 Steam will become like massive games and the rest won't. But Steam doesn't care because they're earning fees everywhere. Right. So if its ecosystem has a transaction model like Gala or like Portal, they win as long as any game wins that's in their ecosystem. Your second most conservative, as you said, would be the players that are often themselves big investors like Polygon Foundation and Immutable X, which are also doing a lot of the infrastructure. So, these are the more conservative plays. But we have seen a lot of eyes on things like Beam recently because people have realized there's a lot of untapped value because they've invested in so many of the early rounds of these tokens that are now coming to fruition.
And so when you're strategizing and you're trying to create a gaming portfolio, this obviously depends a lot on somebody's preferences, how much risk they're willing to take. But what are some of in these 5 categories, like what are some of the projects that you're looking at that you think people should study them a little bit more carefully?
So I would say I'm doing a hybrid approach. Whether people want to do it or not, that's up to them. But for me, the hybrid approach is for existing tokens, I'm generally looking at the ecosystems. So, we can list them. There aren't that many. There's Gala, there's Ronin, there's Portal, there's Nakamoto, if people want to extend to that as well. They're doing a lot of smaller games in the Asian market. And then there are some that might become ecosystem tokens soon. For example, Prime Token. They've got one big game linked to it, but they're looking to do more games. And similarly, one could say apecoin is a potential ecosystem token because they now have their own chain and they're trying to onboard. So if you believe Gamefi is going to make it, holding a bag of these is a really good hedge because that's a bet on the sector, right? That's the equivalent of buying an index of the sector because between these infrastructure and ecosystem tokens, they've basically covered a finger in all the pies, right? Even if you just look at it from the point of view that Immutable X is a big investor in a lot of these projects too, you've got a wide set over there. If you're willing to do more direct research, then you can start to look at tokens coming out, right? Because as you mentioned before, we're kind of in the euphoria stage. People can start to be a little bit greedier or a little bit more outgoing, if you will. And so looking to get into angel rounds and VC rounds and stuff has proven to be a really good strategy. I would say what you want to look for, though, in those cases is look for games that have been building through the bear market and that didn't use up their social capital last time around by selling a token or selling a lot of NFTs. A really good example of two that came out recently would be Mavia and Pixels. Both of them did extraordinarily well, and both of them did their token launch, before selling a whole bunch of assets, right? So that would be another really good approach to go if you're looking for single games. Look for the games that are coming to market. Also, of course, look for the marketing teams. This is important as well. And then the last category would be the redemption arc. Which of those players got really hit hard in the bear market, price-wise, but continued to build and do good things and are now bringing their game to market? A good example of this, to me, my personal favorite, would be Mirandus. That's Gala Games' flagship game. And that's a small market cap token, for example. People can go and look into that. So those are the three categories I'm personally looking at. And I personally think that's probably a good approach to go.
Some may argue that it's better to look at brand new projects because they're in price discovery. So what are your thoughts on that argument?
So I would definitely agree with that, but I'm still going to default to try to get into the pre-sales and the angels. Because if if one's hedging their bet of risks, right? Even these tokens that have come out, many of them have stuck around their price. They were already at a 25x for when the investors got in, right? So a lot of them will struggle to go a lot higher than that. If you believe in the full cycle that Gamefi is going to still, do many multiples, we're not even in the bull yet, sure, start adding them to your bag. And there's definitely an argument to say the new kid on the block doesn't come with all the baggage, right? Because when we look at Gala, there's a lot of drama. They've had a lot of legal dramas. They've had two coins come out. The CEOs are still suing each other. Ronin had a theft, I believe it was, you and I were talking at the time, I think it was 600 million. They upset a lot of people with the Axie game. But you can make the same price discovery argument in the other direction. If you're buying a token at a 98% discount and the technical guys are going to come in and look at those charts, well, you know where you can potentially trade it. So if you're just going to hodl, yes, maybe from a hodl point of view, fill up with new coins. But if you're also going to be actively maybe swing trading, you've got, thresholds to reach or ceilings that look, I can buy Gala at this price and sell at that price because that's a potential ceiling. So it really depends how active a trader the person is.
To add more context about Gala, because I know that they've been in the news for some of the issues around ownership, but on the flip side of that, I feel like it hasn't necessarily stopped them from building because them being a platform, but now they are a chain, and before you know it, I imagine that there are going to be applications building on top of this chain. So I feel like during the bear market, they've continued to build despite the fact that there's been some drama around them. So to me, that's kind of exciting to hear that they've been diligently working.
Yeah, and this is why the first thing I say to anyone asking me about Gamefi is ecosystem tokens, because the ones that have survived and been building, I really don't think people realize how much of the market share they control and how many of the problems they've solved for everyone. For example, Gala's founder nodes are still responsible for a lot of the NFT art storage, right? Gala also has Gala Music. Gala's new chain has its own DEX on it that is basically burning Gala tokens and they're earning no fees for it. So they have a lot they've learned from the previous cycle that a lot of new people, even if they take all that they've learned from the previous cycle, you've still had people that have been building for 3 years that have actual on the ground experience with what could actually go wrong and what works. So absolutely. If you want to be safe, as I say, go for the ecosystem tokens and not the single games, because single games can kind of upset more people, if you will. But yeah, do not discount Gala, Ronin, Immutable X, Polygon. These are literally the foundation blocks right now.
So before moving on, because I had to ask you about the games, but more about Gala and perhaps some of their competitors, Illuvium. They made a lot of noise during the last bull market. I mean, do you feel like are they still building during the bear? Like, do you feel like there's any traction there? Do they have the potential to rebound this cycle?
Yeah, I think Illuvium is going to be one of the early success stories because in the AAA space, there are only a few players of significant note. So I think in the AAA space, there are a few players that really have first mover advantage in a very good way. Illuvium is one of them. Potentially Shrapnel is another one. MetalCore is another one, and then we have to look at things like Mirandus and potentially Otherside if we want to extend to virtual world. So I think Illuvium is going to help this bull cycle. It's going to be one of the contenders that is already ready to come to market, if you will, and they did a tremendous amount in the bear market. I think their design team has been superb. Maybe a little bit OCD, if I were to give objective criticism. I wish that they would have pushed a few things more to market faster, but I can see the quality control has been superb. So I think it's going to be quite an exciting player. In terms of actual gameplay, though, I'm concerned with their auto battler. It's not necessary for everyone, but their overworld, which is their core kind of hunting game, it looks remarkable, and all the playtests have been fabulous.